Hi, delightful humans. It's Keilani here, and I wanted to take a moment to speak directly from my heart about something important, the evolution of this channel and the podcast. You may have noticed a shift. Delightfully Dysfunctional is now Delightfully Dharmic, and this change did not come lightly. It's been something that James and I have been talking about for months, especially with his move to Tennessee, and he's in full support. So, although he is still a fellow delightful human and will probably be popping on every once in a while, there's going to be a shift where you'll be seeing a little bit more of me and a little bit less of James, but know that his heart is still here with us. Delightfully Dysfunctional was born from a deep desire for us to speak openly about the messy, unfiltered human experience. And for many of us, including me, that language felt like a permission slip to be raw, real, imperfect. But over time, I've also felt something emerging in me. This gentle and persistent pull toward deeper alignment, toward healing not just the dysfunction, but embracing the wholeness that's always been there underneath it. I've changed. My work has changed, and I want this podcast and channel to evolve with me. Delightfully Dharmic reflects that growth. It's a space where psychology meets spirit, where evidence based healing walks hand in hand with soul centered wisdom, where the nervous system and the cosmos are equally at home.
All right, now, without further ado, let's dive into today's episode.
Hello, and welcome to Delightfully Dharmic. I'm Keilani, and today my guest is Dr. Stacy Dicker. She is a clinical psychologist, an author, and educator, and she spent over 2 decades helping people better understand themselves and their relationships. With a background in academic psychology and years of experience in private practice, Stacy has uniquely blended traditional therapeutic models with ancient wisdom of astrology. She's the author of Psychstrology, Apply the Wisdom of the Cosmos to Gain Balance and Improve Your Relationships, a groundbreaking book that bridges psychology and astrology to foster self-awareness, compassion, and personal growth. Her work invites us to see ourselves and our ancestral intergenerational trauma through a more holistic and soul-centered lens. And I am so excited to dive into this conversation with her today. I'm also so honored to call Stacy a dear and close friend. Thank you so much for joining us today, Stacy.
Keilani, it is such an honor to be here with you. And I bet your guests probably know this already, but you wrote that bio, and it is so beautiful to read the bio, your bio that someone else wrote that sees you with such kind and loving eyes. It was such a gift, actually, to read that bio that you wrote of mine. So thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here.
I admire and look up to you and think that you are so kick-ass and cool. So this conversation is going to be so exciting and fun to share with everyone. And it is so in line with this shift that the podcast is having about really connecting and being aligned because you have such amazing tools to help people understand themselves, which is what this is all about.
That's so beautiful. Thank you so much. That is absolutely. I'm so excited to be one of the first people to be with the new name, and it's
Yes.
it's such a beautiful evolution and new name, and I'm just so excited. It's awesome.
What's so funny too, I think it was so cosmically led, an appropriate way for us to describe this because a dear mutual friend, Lisa, connected me to Stacy like months ago. Like 9 months ago maybe. And in our initial conversation, we just talked and had fun for like 2 hours. And then we scheduled another one and it just ended up being like this monthly or like bi-monthly like soul connected friend just love surge. And we kept saying like next time we'll schedule the podcast, next time, because that connection was so rich and vibrant that we couldn't stop having fun. And so again, that now this moment where we're like, okay, now let's actually do the podcast for the kickoff of Delightfully Dharmic. It feels perfect. So thank you again.
Oh, That's the best synchronicity. Um,
Mm.
by the way, it's been over a year,
Over a year.
actually. Yeah, it's been over a year
Oh,
because I
happy
remember
anniversary
wishing,
to
yeah,
us.
right, right. And shout out to Lisa. I love that you brought her
Yes.
in. She so deserves
Hmm.
to be shouted out. Talk about another rock star. That girl is, I'm so just excited to see what she does. She's amazing. And so
Yes.
are you. And the way that we met
We're
was so
so lucky.
synchronistic.
I want our listeners to understand some of your journey too, because coming from that clinical background of psychology, I'm sure it felt like a coming out of the closet as you were understanding these other truths that astrology was giving you. And I'd love some insight into that path and that transition.
Well, so it's funny. I actually found astrology long before I mean, I was really into psychology actually from the time I was a young kid. My early research papers were, I was like, this is weird that I'm divulging this, but whatever. I found psychopaths really interesting. I found anorexia, which I actually came to have and recover from. Suicide. I was writing papers on stuff that was
Right.
really, really deep and heavy from the time I was in seventh
Right.
grade.
Hmm.
And so, really, when I say I found astrology first, I don't know how true that is. I found them both, but I was really young when I first found astrology. One of my aunts, my dear aunt, who's still so dear to me, she had a book eh, from the 70s called Love Signs, Linda Goodman's Love Signs. And when I want to say like 10, 11, maybe even a tiny bit younger, I found it and it felt like a remembering. I wouldn't have described it that way at the time, but now looking back, there's an element of like it possessed me so much so quickly that I feel like there was a remembering. And being Jewish, people say that it started with ancient Kabbalah and like that the Hebrew sages were, I mean, different people will say different things about it, but knowing that I come from Jewish lines,
Right.
I felt like I would not be surprised if in my lineage people were into it because it really did just feel like this.
Yeah.
It just felt so much wiser than the people that I was listening to. It felt like I could see under the
Hmm.
stuff that I felt like so many of the people, like there was,
Beyond
I
the
don't know, because
mind, beyond what we can
yes,
understand in the mind, in
that's what it
academia,
is.
and in the institutionalization of psychology and growth. It had a deeper truth, is what I'm hearing. And I think it's so
Exactly.
interesting too, if anyone really like reflects back on when they were a child and the things that they loved, it's probably still things that you love now, and like allowing yourself and giving yourself permission to lean into that, I think is really important and so insightful if you take that journey. And it's like even little pieces that you're mentioning exactly. Like I was super into Viktor Frankl and books about holocausts and genocides, which is interesting because we were just talking right before this about the intergenerational trauma, and I know that we'll dive into that as well. I don't know, maybe we'll dive into that now, even though I was intending on it being later, it feels right.
Yeah, right. Wow. So what I was telling you before, I wanted to make sense how I ended up in these lands. So the astrology and psychology, I'm going to back up really quick and start at the beginning, and then I'm going to weave in how I ended up with all the ancestral stuff.
Yes.
So
Okay.
when I was young, I thought I wanted it well because the psychopaths led to a focus on
Psychopaths.
justice. I really was, it's hard to be interested in psychopaths and also not be interested in justice since they create
Right.
such havoc that you end up, being interested in justice. So
Mm.
I kind of misperceived my path because of that focus on justice. And I went to law school. I don't know that this was a misperception. Maybe it needed to happen this way, but
Right.
I went to law school and I realized right away that I was going to be chewed up and spit
Mhm.
out like this, little
Yeah.
21-year-old idealist who wanted good things. It just was not a good match. So I ended up going back. Well, I had been a psych major undergrad. So
Okay.
I knew I wanted psychology was the only other thing I ever could see doing. But I actually, before I went into clinical psych, I forgot about this until just recently. I remembered it for the first time in a while that I actually was on the fence about doing clinical psych or social psych because the whole group thing and like how people behave in groups. And I had real fascination with that. But the thing that made me so overwhelmed with law was that it was so big picture. And I feel like social psych in a way had this element of it too, where it was so big picture that I worried that I couldn't do anything. I worried I wouldn't be effective at making any kind of a difference if it was too big. So there's a way that one-on-one, becoming a clinical psychologist and seeing people one-on-one,
You can play in
which
the
is what I
depth
did.
more. Yeah. Yeah.
Totally. It's so much less intimidating when it's just one person and
Mhm.
you're, I'm not saying it's not intimidating. It's plenty intimidating in
Yeah.
its own way, but not in that way. You can be myopic
Right.
and, well, this is a good segue because then that didn't work. I started realizing that I was helping people process a lot of anger,
Yeah.
which I had to process myself,
Yeah, we
before
can
I could
only
be
help
ready
people
to,
go as far as we've done our own healing and processing.
yep. And turns out I had a lot of anger that I had to get through before I could sort of incorporate a more holistic way of understanding anything. And over time, what I came to see is all of my clients, I did depth therapy and family of origin work. And so it didn't take long before I realized, well, God, all of these people, every one of us, I mean, my own parents included, so much of our own trauma,
Yeah.
of their own trauma, that there's no way that they could have done any better. And that was a huge, huge, like, it was funny because I really feel like I could feel in a way like the ceiling got blown out in a way. And it sounds like it was good, but it was actually deeply, deeply destabilizing because it made me a lot less angry and a lot more sad. I feel like there was a lot more of that grieving of the sadness of everything that happened to all of us. I mean,
Yeah.
those things did not just happen to one person. All
Right.
these things have happened to all of us and our ancestors and collective trauma. I mean, our generation now that are so sophisticated in how we can study these things and how we work with people because we've done so much work to figure out how to help people. We're now in the generations, I believe, that are
Mhm.
here to help actually work on healing some of
Yeah.
this stuff because we can, or before we couldn't.
Right. We're illuminating that, and I think so many previous generations did have that thought of like, well, you didn't go through this, I went through this, and that there isn't that passing down of. But
Mhm.
we heal through relation to other people. So if our family, if our parents don't know how to appropriately attach and don't know how to appropriately feel through what they've gone through, they're not going to be able to attend to us in the right way. And studies specifically on Holocaust survivors and their families through the generations show that higher likelihood of anxiety, depression, and trauma really being present within their genetics because
Yep.
there's that predisposition when, again, not just from a genetic pathway, but in the nurturing of that child's nervous system,
Yep.
it shows up. And what's interesting too, I don't know why I had never made that connection until we were talking today, but your family having had that huge trauma in your past, and although not the same, but my Japanese grandparents were in the Japanese internment camps and felt that, and I can see because it's a closer timeline in some way. No, it's not, but it's all within America. It's easier to trace down in some ways. Very clearly how that affected the generations following and trickles down still to affect me.
Absolutely. That's the thing that is was so groundbreaking about that epigenetic research is that you could actually study that. I mean, it wasn't just individual people reflecting on it, that it was actually something that you could see. And when you know trauma, how you know trauma as a therapist, how I know trauma, so much of why that is because things didn't get resolved. They
Right.
didn't get processed, they didn't get talked about, they didn't get acknowledged. That's the stuff that flows down and
Yeah.
continues to need resolution because if people aren't even talking about it, I mean, there's no way. It's just ignored and avoided in a way that is
Mm,
like we're all colluding. The kids that grow up in that understand we don't talk about that. We don't talk
yeah.
about that. I bet you can relate to that too. In my family,
Mhm.
my parents were so unwilling slash unable, I now realize, to
Mm,
talk about the
yeah.
traumas that they had suffered. My mom was an immigrant from Sicily and had major trauma that I knew nothing about. I mean, that's the thing. This becomes ours. Like you're saying, it
Mm,
becomes ours. I think that the part of me that's more mature and aware now doesn't blame them the way that I did when I was a young therapist, early in my own therapy, and, my clients, helping us all get in touch with that anger that we didn't have a chance to get in touch with is super important. I'm not trying to say it's not important, but it's
Right.
not a stopping place, you know?
Yes, we don't want to linger there. Like righteous anger is an emotion that we should express. It is healthy too. But if we linger there, it festers and it becomes resentment and it becomes not forgiving of ourselves or others. And it it's robbing yourself and your family of a gift of liberation.
Exactly. And it's so hard. I mean, as we're talking about this, I couldn't agree more. And I'm so aware of how hard that is for so many
Yeah.
people who have had the most
Mm,
terrible trauma. And I
mm,
mean, I could not express enough how much empathy I have. I have forgiven things I never thought I would. And I also have not forgiven some things. And I think
yeah.
this conversation, to me, this is kind of where I'm headed, is that from that individual one-on-one work in a closed door, room with just two people, I think I now feel, after 2.5 decades of that, like I'm ready. This is why I brought up the law school thing, because it's not
Mm,
normally anything I talk about, but these roots were there from the time I was little. And, those roots of like, we got to be able to do something with all of that unprocessed pain
mm,
and trauma as a collective. We've got to pick up where our ancestors left off, and we're not able to go further than they did with the healing. That's why we have bodies and we have our lives, and we have a unique possibility of doing work that they can't. And yet we can impact them because it's all part of the same lines. And people will tell you that time and space collapse. And so this is like an indigenous concept that when you do work on your lines, it goes back 7 generations as
mm,
opposed to 7 generations. So it all matters. It all counts a lot.
mm. That's really cool. And as a parent too, I'm acutely aware that my task is to keep doing that work and that healing work because otherwise in unconscious ways it will spill over for them. As an imperfect human, I see that. I see
Yeah,
when
but you
I
can repair,
yeah, yes, I see when I
right?
mess up and I immediately try to repair because I'm not trying to be anyone's guru. I'm not trying to saying I'm a perfect parent. I am not.
Mhm.
But how do we give ourselves that grace and continue on that path? It's through this work. And what's
Absolutely.
fascinating to me too, it's so exciting, it's so cool. Like uh, we were just discussing previous to recording too, like this is what all of our ancestors, no matter what part of the world you hail from, our ancestors didn't have these distractions that we do today. They didn't have electricity, they didn't have devices, they didn't have the internet, they didn't have books if we're going back far enough, right? They had the stars. They had the
Right.
sky. And I don't think that it is honoring of their intelligence and of their intuition to dismiss what wisdom can come from the cosmos and the sky. I'd love to understand more of your perspective when it comes to astrology and your understanding of people and these generational pieces too.
Mm. Such a juicy, rich, like braid of all these different things. I'm going to go back to Jung, because Jung helped me understand astrology, because he had no less than 7 different theories on trying to understand how it worked. And this is one of my favorite things about Jung, actually, that as he got older, he got less and less certain of things he thought he was sure of, and he rewrote and changed things up. And I don't know that he would even say that he knows exactly, but I will tell you the things that he came to that are the most like, that seem the most
Focus.
probable and
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So one of them is that there is this ancient concept that is still very much very resonant, which is as above, so below. And another version of it is as within, so without. And that's an ancient saying. It's
Mm,
like
mhm,
Heraclitus. I could be wrong about that. Don't quote me, but it's ancient. And what Jung came to see was kind of like that was not wrong. That was not that he maybe added a layer, Jung did, but that was kind of underneath it all. So what Jung brought to astrology that was so beautiful was synchronicity. He called astrology synchronicity on a grand scale. And so what synchronicity is it's when two things that are connected by meaning correspond or coexist in time. It's not a causal thing. It's not like you're saying this causes this. This kind of blew my mind when I learned this about astrology, because when I was first learning about astrology, I thought that your birth chart was like a stamp that you got, and and it like the universe stamping you. And what someone told me when I want to say I was in my early 20s, and it really blew my mind. I feel like it took me maybe a year just to really get my brain around this, but it's both, because we pick. So we
There's free
pick.
will.
Exactly. So, and we pick, well, that filters all the way through with astrology and the fact that we have
Yeah.
this chart and free will. But so we are picking that time
Yeah.
to be born. So it's actually it's not just that one, it caused our birth charts. It's that we jointly connected on that moment
I,
to have our birth charts reflect what the cosmos.
yeah. Oh, it's so funny. This last night, we had a dear friend, Irene, over, and my husband, Zach, and I were talking with her about these concepts. And as we get into it, we'll be describing some principles that we've both come to from separate places. And as like, oh, this is undeniably true and accurate to me in my lived experience. Where it's like a video game and you're picking your avatar and you're like, yeah, okay, what human design do you want? Uh-huh. And like, what gene? Yeah, I'm gonna select this guy. I want these lessons in this lifetime. So I'm gonna make sure that this is the combination of things that can bear that fruit for me.
Yep. And that
And
will help me with my challenges. Life I'm being born into, this chart will help me in these ways.
yeah, yeah, it's a very different way of looking and understanding oneself than really the sterilized version that most of psychology comes from.
When I presented at ASEP, the Association for Comprehensive Energy Psychology, I presented in 2022. It was about using your psychological astrology to help you cultivate more compassion for yourself and other people. But I took this detour that ended up, it's funny because at the time I was like apologetic about I saw it as a detour, and it's turned out to be something that's so deeply important to me, and like became kind of a central point in its own way, which is this exact thing you're talking about, that our field, this field of psychology, however you want
Yeah,
to lay it out, has been, and I'm not trying to get into, like, I deeply understand that religion has caused so many problems. And I'm not trying to say that we should have not separated in
yeah,
any meaningful way. But I think that it feels like there's been this carving where all of our masculine traits, and I'm not just meaning men, I mean the
right.
masculine in all of us.
Exactly. We have masculine and feminine energy within each of us. Yes.
Yeah, it's like a yin yang of
Mhm.
we all have both. Um, and the masculine is all channeled into what we know as the field of psychology, and everything feminine, and astrology is included in there. I mean, all these ancient wisdom systems that are not studyable. We were talking about this beforehand, that you try and study astrology in a lab like that, and it's like, fuck you. No, just like any woman who's somebody's trying to reduce them to like a box, and like it's numinous. The feminine is the numinous. And again, men have this in them too. This is not just in the domain of
Right.
women, but in psychology, there's so much that if it can't be understood,
Mhm.
they're not interested. And in the yin yang, the yin is the dark. And so it's not understandable in the same ways. And
Mhm.
it gets thrown out. This is actually, I
Mhm.
want to remember to say, because I love this. It's so cool about Jung. And we were talking about how Jung was such a front runner, and so many of his ideas are so, getting new packaging and like getting new exposure. He's just, he's such an amazing guy. But so his idea about synchronicity and the story that's always told that helps you really appreciate it. And it relates to what I was just talking about. That's why it made me remember. He had a patient on his couch who was although he was not, he didn't have the Freudian kind of couch. But he had someone in his office who was very in her head, who was a female, very in her head, and very much a thinking type, as he would put it. And he kept trying to get her to connect more to the feeling and the intuition and the things that are not so much in the mind. And she had a dream that she was telling him about, and it involved a golden scarab, which is like a beetle. And it was something about, I feel like it was like a brooch, a golden scarab brooch or something in the dream. And at the time that she was talking about it, he heard a rap at the window. Apparently his desk was right by the window, and he just opened the window in time, and this golden beetle flew into his hand, and he went, like this one? I mean, that's synchronicity. And it just cracked her. It cracked her. And that's what synchronicity is meant to do. That's my whole point. If we study, we run statistics. I mean, I'm not helpful to science and to research. I'm not. I came from that world. I understand the point, but
And there's value.
also,
It's like we're not throwing it out. There's value.
Exactly. But when it's divorced, I feel like it got unzipped from this whole other side. That's the feminine has more to do with the holding function, the grounding function, the compassion and the feeling around things, and pausing, and just there's so much about that world that turns its back on this world. It reminds me of like witch time. Honestly, it's the same kind of thing. And yeah. So anyway,
I have a synchronicity for you. I hope it's not one that you already know, but I'm going to start actually by tying in the quote that's on your book from Jung. Astrology represents the sum of all the psychological knowledge of antiquity. So I'm going to start with that. Here's Stacy's book, Psychstrology. And I don't know if you know this, but a few years ago, there was a study, a stunning experiment that had happened where they entangled two photons from a 2D interference pattern. And the image was a yin yang. That like, that, yes.
I did not know this.
Yes. The image. So like how would our ancestors have known that this is a symbol of balance for the universe when we didn't even discover that that is something that is embedded in our cells and embedded in our understanding of the universe and what happens on this tiny, minute level that they could never have seen until a couple of years ago.
That's like, and makes perfect sense to me, because I feel like that's the thing with synchronicity, right? Is it doesn't have to make logical sense. You just feel it. And when you just get goosebumps, and you know, exactly. There's another one where ancient Egyptians showed they had a diagram of a brain that I saw once that had the snake in between where the corpus callosum goes. And it was so crazy that they had realized that there was this like thing that goes back and forth between the hemispheres. The way they had drawn it, it was like they got the energy just right of that, like the corpus callosum. So to your point.
Well, okay, now I have to keep going with okay. Also, like my husband Zach, he's just this consumer of knowledge, and like it's insatiable. He's always learning, and then he brings that information to me, and I make it pretty and understandable. But he was doing research into like snakes are representative of the feminine very often in history, and eagles or some kind of bird, raptor is often the masculine. So even when you just go back in the symbology through history, and let's just take the examples of flags that since countries have been having flags, which is a pretty short amount of time in the span that humans have been around. But it's incredibly interesting to see what combinations show up and what was happening in that country, in that time in history, when that was represented, and to really unpack the symbology right there. And again, it's so interesting that like in this Egyptian artwork, the weaving of the feminine really making these connections.
I love that so much. And I especially love that it was Zach who uncovered that, because I know Zach has a son in Scorpio, and the whole archetype of Scorpio, the scorpion and the eagle is the higher, or the phoenix that rises from the ashes. So there's a way that he like has those in his, because Scorpio is also a feminine sign. So that snake energy of death and rebirth is so scorpionic. So it's so funny that he is the one who learned that. You made me just remember, I had a dream about an eagle not that long ago, and it was doing backwards loops. And today, as we're talking about it, I feel like it's like it was going back, like pulling the stuff from back forward again. And the eagle being like the
Right?
masculine thinking function. And that just is, that's so deep.
Oh,
Go Zach.
I know he's gonna be so excited that that this came up for him. He's like, yes.
It's deep.
It is. It is. And so you have been uncovering, like, really, like, I think your life's purpose is to keep uncovering these layers, to keep, like, seeing and discovering and understanding from this beautiful wide lens. Like, let's back it up. We thought we were back enough. No, we're gonna back it up farther. We gotta back it up. We gotta see the big, big picture. Um, and it's so fun to just continually understand your thinking and your understanding because it has brought some such truths. It has me curious back to kind of this individual working with individuals. Because again, I think you're zooming in, you zoom out, you zoom in, you zoom out. We're back to like healing one person at a time in that work that you've been doing in your private practice. How do you bring this information to your clients? How do you offer this to them?
A good question. I will say I don't offer it. There's such an individual vibe in all of your individual client relationships that I really, and actually, will be talking about the gene keys. So I might as well weave it in right now. And maybe we'll,
Yeah.
we'll
Let's
give a
def
definition of what
let's
the,
define.
do you,
Yeah. I would love for you to because I don't know that I can do it justice.
okay. Okay. Well, so I'll tell about my exposure and experience with the gene keys, and then I'll link it back to your question because
Okay.
my it's called your evolution, your sphere of evolution becomes really important to your question. So what the gene keys are it came from the human design system originally, but it's all its own amazing thing. So the human design system was people call it a download. There was a man named the name he went by was Ra Uru, and it was like 1986 or 1987, he had this download and it's incredible. I mean, it's really like to someone like me, and I feel like Jung, by the way, would have loved the Gene Keys because Jung was super into astrology, and he also wrote the forward to the I Ching. So he was way into the I Ching too. So I feel like he would have loved the Gene
Yeah.
Keys. So and human design. So basically, Ra Uru, to my understanding, I know much more about the Gene Keys than I do about human design. But so he blended the I Ching and astrology, and also the chakra system and Kabbalah into it downloaded into him. But
Right.
basically the um 64 gates of the I Ching are mapped onto the zodiac. So each of the signs contains certain gates within it. And so then Richard Rudd, who's the creator of the Gene Keys, who studied with Ra'uru for two
Oh.
plus decades, came up with it. It's interesting. I've heard some stories that made me think of Freud and Jung, actually, because
Mm.
to hear Richard Rudd tell it, I'm not trying to like put words in his mouth. These are my leanings from hearing Richard Rudd tell it, or maybe even hearing people talk about it. But Richard kind of went off on he had his own ideas that he was excited to develop. And I don't know that the human design community or Ra himself were very open to him sort of expanding and running it with it, which is just what happened with Freud and Jung.
Right.
Jung got blackballed and blacklisted in the community because he wouldn't be Freud's mouthpiece. He wanted to say his own stuff, which was quite different in a lot of ways. So
Right.
anyway,
It's
so
it's
Richard
I
Rudd,
think the test and the challenge of staying authentic and true to your beliefs that they both had to walk through.
oh, true.
Mm.
Such a beautiful, beautiful through line and true. I totally agree. So what the gene keys are, they take certain human design gates and they are mapped onto, this is also a Kabbalah thing because Kabbalah has spheres and pathways through the spheres. So that's what the gene keys, they take your birth chart and it gets translated into it. Also, here's another really cool piece of human design in the gene keys that is so amazing. I love it so much that they take your birth chart from 88 days before your birth. It's called your unconscious or design date.
Right.
And they take that date, and that date has its own chart that then interacts with your birth chart. and
Which is the
which is
belief of when
incredible.
the soul meets the baby in utero.
Yeah, I guess so. And they, the reason that that struck me so much when I learned it was that when I was in utero, my mom's mom died of a heart attack on October 12th of 1972. I was born in January of 1973. So October 12th, my mom's mom died. And then October 18th was my design date. So I was so grateful to know that there was a snapshot of that time for me, because once I was in therapy, like deep psychoanalytic therapy, I realized how much that must have impacted me. Even just being 6 months in utero was something I'd never really considered before. But that's one thing about human design, is it captures your design date, which is, and just the idea of that it looks at both charts together and like incorporates aspects of both, because they're going to be square to each other if they're 3 months apart. So it's just this incredible, which produces tension. When signs are square, there's tension. I don't know that they're all exactly square, but they're roughly square. So it's just a brilliant system and brings brilliant things to astrology. So, and then here's what Richard Rudd brings that's different from human design.
Right.
So he boiled it down to this system that he talks about, something called the art of contemplation. And that the way that we can actually, this is my favorite part, my favorite part, is that it creates a workable way to be alchemized and alchemize yourself by using your own birth chart, the wisdom of your own birth chart, because all of the wisdom that he gives you that you're contemplating and just listening to again and again and considering again and again, all of that is based in your birth chart. So it feels eerily, eerily spot on, because it's your birth chart. That's the only way it could be so spot on, is that it's your birth chart. So, but it allows you to continue to be exposed. He has every key broken up into a shadow, a gift, and what is called a siddhi, Siddhi, which is the divine essence. It's a Sanskrit word. Those siddhis can actually be really helpful for you to get what the gift is.
Which is
Because
really like the gift set aflame. It's like your highest evolution
perfect.
of that, and how you can transfer your wisdom through walking through that shadow and gaining that knowledge, and then share it with the world. Because we're meant to serve others. That's what the
Exactly.
point is all about. How do I love
Exactly.
others better?
Exactly. That's so Jungian. That's one of the ways that we were talking, how I see Jung in IFS. I also see Jung in Dan Siegel, interpersonal neurobiology. Dan Siegel talks all about differentiation and linkage. And I feel like that's very similar to, how Jung talked about individuation, but then we individuate to serve the collective. We need to become those differentiated, really authentic versions of ourselves. But then we need to, it's not just for us. Why would that be? That makes no sense. So
It's for
anyway, I love that. The gift of flame. That was such a beautiful way to describe the city. That's perfect. Richard Rudd would love that.
And all of these are really tools for just achieving more balance and wholeness, helping someone understand themselves, their purpose, their gifts, and how do I transfer that?
Exactly. Exactly. And one of the things that I really love about the system of the gene keys is that, so Jung talked a lot about the tension of opposites. He saw everything as like the thinking and the feeling function, for instance. And then this is also true about the sensation and that intuitive function, but they're on a continuum. And his thinking was, you want to try and stay in the middle as much as possible so that both are accessible. Even though you're going to tend toward one or the other. If you get too far into feeling, you can't access thinking. If you get too far into thinking, you can't access feeling. And so one of the things about the gene keys that's so great is that they actually take that principle. There's something that Richard Rudd calls programming partners. And what they are two gene keys on opposite sides of the zodiac. So they are in polar opposite signs. They're in like the degrees that match each other on the other side of the zodiac. And those together. So this comes back to your question to me about weaving it in. So my life's work gene key is the shadow. It's just great. The shadow is psychosis. No joke, which he describes.
Funny from like your interest to obviously like,
Oh my God, is so meant to be that yes. And And what he defines psychosis as is thinking that you can solve the problems of the world with the mind, which is so beautiful. That's such a beautiful. So here's a perfect example of where I feel like the gene keys really add to. I mean, I've had exposure to astrology forever, but for decades. And I had learned about myself already a long time ago that Capricorn, which is my sun, and like 4 other things. My Capricorn is about, we take life very seriously. But what Richard Rudd showed me with my life's work gene key, the city is sanctity. And it made it make so much sense to me when I realized, yeah, that's what's serious, is that this life is sacred. You know, like when I think back to my early life, I looked so mad at my parents because, and this explains it, is because I feel like they did not get that life, you know, they were too traumatized. But this is a much finer point, I think, on my life's work than just being serious. It's like this idea that, and that the gift is inspiration. So I'm here to inspire people to want to live a life that's more sacred and filled with meaning. And so this was to answer your question. So my evolution, which is the programming partner of that, the shadow is intellect, which blends with psychosis. It's like that whole idea that your brain can really be your shadow. It can really be your shadow, which honestly, I think it's such beautiful fuckery. I say that in the most loving way. It's life, man. That is how it shows up. It's like, here I came in, I'm smart, and I'm like, gonna fill my brain. I'm gonna learn all the things to keep myself safe. And my teachers are like, guess what? You better get out of that brain of yours here. It's not gonna go well. And like, yeah, there you go. Like, thank you, life, for showing me that deep truth. Those are my shadows. That's my shadow. And of course it is. Whatever we overdevelop becomes what's shadowy for us. And my intellect was that saying. So to answer your question, a very long-winded way, the gift is precision. And so each person, it's so different. And that is what I have learned really specifically, is that I can't go in to any relationship with anyone and expect them to make equal use of the same piece of wisdom. It's like there's no use in me putting it out there to just everyone.
Yeah. Discernment.
Exactly. That's a
Right.
great
And I think
synonym for
that,
persistence.
yeah, and it's tying in again this like theme of balance, that these tools are meant to help us
Exactly.
find this balance. And like, and this is, I mean, it's so funny. Like, you know, we've had so many conversations dancing around these topics, and I gave you the questions that I wanted to address. And I never thought we would be boiling it down to like one word. It's balance.
So is balance and fullness. That's the other word I
Yeah.
would use. That's very Jungian. That's because we have all these parts to us. And this is what we were talking about before with the intergenerational stuff, that our parents and our parents' parents, so many people in our lines could not work with these things in ways that where they could transmute them into things that are better. And so, anyway, yeah, I think that balance and wholeness, being able to love those parts of us that we have not been able to incorporate, being able to transmute them into the lovable versions of themselves I feel like, so that's the other piece I would add besides balance. I think wholeness is very much like no part, no part left out, you know? And there's this saying I love from the Roman, I think he was Roman playwright Terence, that says, nothing human is alien to me. And I feel like that's right. That's just,
I mean, and that was the whole goal of Delightfully Dysfunctional too. It was like, no, let's embrace all those messy pieces. Let's talk about them here. Let's make sense of that. Let's not excise any part of us. Again, like back to internal family systems, back to like embracing our parts and reparenting them. There's just, again, all these, it's just a different vocabulary to try and hit all of the different humans out there and the way that they are willing and able to receive it. So Could we start with understanding and giving me just a quick description of what is a birth chart? What does that mean? Because it's not just the same as like, you're a Taurus, you're an Aries, you're a Scorpio. This is more robust.
Absolutely. And with the design date of the other chart, it makes it that much even more robust. So what a chart is, whether we're talking about a birth chart or that design date chart, it's a snapshot. So it just takes a snapshot of what was going on in the cosmos at that exact moment. And all of those things mean something. They all mean lots of things. That's the thing, is that this can get very, very, you can spend much time understanding the symbolic language of your birth chart once you have that snapshot, because basically what it tells you are your archetypes, is how Jung referred to them, which are really just like themes, motifs, these kind of timeless dimensions that have been there since time immemorial, that some people are like this and some people are like this. And, it's like our life lessons. I feel like the archetypes that we are here to embody.
Which is funny. I'm just like really connecting this in this moment, but that's essentially what theater, the arts, movies, television shows, they're actually like spiritually linked. These are just embodiments of different archetypes put into action for entertainment. But if you are connecting with it well, if you're integrating, there's a lot of deeper possibility. But yes, yeah. The
Exactly.
wounded healer, the white
Exactly.
knight. Yes.
Yep. Exactly. Yeah. And I would say you're exactly right. What we're drawn to is very much, the resonance that we feel to certain books or movies or artists, musical artists, the archetypes that they have been channeling and working in this life. There tends to be a lot of correspondence with, we're drawn to the people who are working through the same thing.
Yeah.
And there's a
Yeah.
lot of wisdom to be able to watch, since we were talking about free will before, to be able to watch different people who live out these archetypes in different ways and bring different, different levels of wisdom and different levels of themselves that help them alchemize them into the ways that look way better. You can have two people. There's something that I remember reading, that Hitler and Charlie Chaplin had birth charts that were so close. They were like a couple of days apart, that they were born in like same year. And Hitler is Hitler, and Charlie Chaplin spent his life trying to make people laugh and feel better. So yeah, that's it's basically a snapshot of the archetypes that are going to be your major themes. Again, with all
Right.
the shadows and the gifts that those
Right.
contain, because
Which is
every
the
single
elements
thing
of free
contains both.
will. Right. Yeah.
Exactly. Yep.
Okay.
You want to spend your time trying to manifest the gifts as opposed
Yeah.
to living in the shadows. And of course, self-awareness, as we were
Mhm.
talking about earlier, self-awareness is everything, and love, compassion, and love, because all the self-awareness, if we're being too harsh with ourselves, we'll never get anywhere. But if we can
Yeah.
shine that light of awareness in a loving way
Right.
and just hold it there on those shadow parts, they change. Even if they only change a little, they change. And then each time they change, they soften, they break apart and become more, we're able to not be in the shadows and be up
Yeah.
in higher frequency and if
Yes. To move through it. Yes.
exactly, to move through it well,
Yes. To
right?
move through it well. And find that space of being able to be that lighthouse for so many other people and illuminate that process for them, which is chef's kiss. It's beautiful.
Thank God you're a mom, because somebody with that level of wisdom and insight who didn't have to, to be, and a therapist, it's so beautiful that you are sharing that, because yes, that's exactly right. You're giving your kids such a different experience than you were able to
Mm,
have, and
thank you.
and then
I'm
your parents
trying.
were able to
Thank
have.
you. Yeah. Mm. Stacy, this has been the highlight of my week. I've been smiling and just feeling so much love and gratitude for you in my life and for this conversation, for your time, for your beautiful brain. Please share with everyone what other offerings are around the corner for you. Of course, everyone can purchase your book, Psychstrology. I'll make sure to leave the link. This is a great starting point to understanding more of yourself and weaving in all of Stacy's wisdom to your growth. But I know you also have a course coming up. Can you tell us more about that offering?
Sure. Yeah. Thank you so much, Keilani. So I'm going to be teaching a class on, I don't know that this is what it's going to be called, but the topic is the scapegoat complex, which is young complexes are Jungian in nature. So it's a book that was originally written in 1986 by an individual Jungian analyst, but it has really broad implications for the collective because scapegoats have been oppressed and shunned and excluded. And it's been a way that we have coped with our own material psychically that we can't hold. I'll just say this so it makes a little more sense that I'm moving into, as I was saying before, more collective and intergenerational healing kind of stuff. And I want to actually do work in anti-racism. And my ultimate dream is to collaborate with a number of people to open up a multicultural community center that's all about healing. And that even once psychedelic healing is legal, to be able to incorporate that too, because there's a lot of promise to be able to access parts of us that have been notoriously difficult to get to without some really serious assistance like these secret medicines can and want to provide to us. So, and the only other thing I'll say, actually too quick, I just finished my education, as you know, with Lisa at CIIS, getting that certificate in psychedelic assisted therapy and research. And then I'm also being trained in practice group leader training in this method by a man named Thomas Hubel, who is an expert in collective trauma healing. And I'm really excited about that because in our field, you can't offer anything free. It doesn't really look like that. It's not that kind of a field that we can really have offerings that are free. I mean, maybe some people have figured that out, but that's not
Our
how.
heart wants to.
Yeah,
My heart wants
right.
to. Yeah.
Right.
That's what this
So
is. That's what I'm trying to do with this podcast.
exactly.
In
Yeah.
a way that is accessible to me. Yeah.
Yeah. That's yes, exactly. Okay. So I don't have something like this. I don't have a podcast, but I
But
am
you being here
getting
is part of
trained.
that. Yes. You being here
Well,
is that ripple effect. And I hope that you sharing your heart and your knowledge, your connection with this wisdom will attract all of the right people for that beautiful dream to come true because the
mm,
world needs
so-
that. And the
oof,
world needs you amplified.
that's so kind of you. I hope so. I mean, I feel like in right timing, which is
Yeah.
not quite yet, but in right timing, I think that the universe is going to work through us, like that there will be the right combination of people that will come together because I think this is really, really needed and really, that the universe wants to conspire to help us. But in the meantime, so I'm going to be hopefully getting certified to lead those practice groups because that's going to be a really important. I feel like it's just really important to help people come together. I feel like that community, that's the piece that I really feel like gets lost in one-to-one work only. But also in the meantime, as you and I were talking about earlier, I am going to be getting certified in being a Gene Keys guide because I am so in love with the system. And it takes a bit to get that certification, but I am definitely on my path to that. Should be by the end of the year. So that'll be really fun in the meantime, as I'm, underground building this bigger picture thing to have this really useful, fun, yes, but also so useful, so deeply, deeply helpful. I mean, he's all about Richard Rudd. It's all about your higher purpose. So it's very much my jam to be able to have this way to help people have their birth charts being accessible, because that's always what I've been about. And I think astrology as a system, not really designed like that. There are astrologers who do readings for you, as opposed to, it's not really the kind of thing that you can learn yourself unless you really, really want to dive in. And the Gene Keys, as much as there's a diving in, it's not that much of a diving in as big of astrology. It makes it much more
More accessible.
doable.
And yeah. And I'm going to be right behind you on that path. It's such fruitful information for growth and deeper insight. And that's our drug.
Yeah. So, and
That's my
it
favorite drug of
literally
choice.
works,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
Well, it's growth. It's just growth. That's really what it is it's all
Mhm.
focused on our alchemizing into the highest versions of ourselves. That
Yeah.
literally is what it's all about. And so, yeah, it's my drug of choice too. There's
Mm.
way worse drugs to be addicted to than
Yeah.
evolution.
Yeah, exactly. And that is the purpose of Delightfully Dharmic, to just follow that aligned path with curiosity and let's add some fun to it. Like it can be fun. It's so fun. It's the best.
This was this was so fun. This was so deep, but it's also so fun. You have
Yeah.
such a gift at making those things like that. It's awesome.
Oh, I adore you, Stacy. Thank you
I
so
adore you.
much for being a part of this passion project and for everything, for just being you.
Well, back at you. I am so honored to have been one of the first guests on your newly named, newly rebirthed version of your podcast. It has been such a joy and an honor, and I just think the absolute world of you.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you. Thank you so much.
Delightful humans, please check out more of Stacy's offerings, which will be linked down below, as well as her book, Psychstrology, which is available for purchase. I appreciate all of you for continuing this journey with me and for continuing to be curious as I am at each new step, at each new phase of growth. That's what this is all about. If you want more information from my offerings, you can go to coachkeilani.com, where I also have some freebies for you. And please don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this episode. There's so many juicy bits, and you never know who they could help, what might be illuminated for someone else. And that's really the point of all of this. So thank you once again, and we will see you in the next one. Bye-bye.